She was standing in the middle of the crowded terminal, surrounded by faces she barely recognized and the hum of ships docking and departing, when her gaze locked on him. The noise around her blurred, a kind of warbling static, like when a holovid glitches, and suddenly he was the only thing in focus. She blinked once, twice, and her heart played a rhythm she hadn't heard in years. A nervous staccato that felt oddly like a kid caught with stolen synth candy. The man, dressed in the dusty uniform of a human soldier, looked just as surprised to see her. His eyes widened, flicking over her blue-tinged skin and those unmistakably long ears that marked her as something other, something almost alien to the hardened spacefaring human, but also familiar. "Wait a minute," she said, stepping closer with a hesitant smirk. "Aren't you the guy who saved me? Or have I been hallucinating after too many hours in cryosleep?" His lips quirked, a half-smile that was part disbelief, part relief. "I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing when I woke up with a concussion and a funny accent," he replied, rubbing the back of his neck like a teenager caught cheating in holochess. "The past had a way of sneaking up on you when you least expected it. It wasn't just the war or the blasted years spent fighting on opposite sides of a conflict that had turned entire star systems into graveyards. It was that one moment, carved out of chaos and blood, that had become a secret thread tying them together. Back then, she had been just a child running through the rubble of a ruined village, her people's rebellion flickering like a dying ember. He was a fresh recruit with hands trembling too much to reload a blaster properly, but enough courage to drag her out of a collapsing building. Now, years later, they stood awkwardly in the terminal, trying to piece together who they had become. "You still carry that ancient blaster? I thought we'd all switched to plasma by now," she teased, nodding at the worn weapon slung low on his hip. "Hey, it's vintage," he shot back, "like a fine wine, but with more explosions." Her laugh, bright and unexpected, cut through the tension like a laser through alloy. It was the kind of sound that reminded him of easier times, before orders and politics and betrayals tangled them up like vines on a forgotten world. "So, what brings you to this circus of starships and lost causes?" she asked, folding her arms, ears flicking with curiosity. He shrugged, eyes scanning the crowd as if expecting trouble to jump out from behind a merchant drone. "Apparently someone decided peace talks were more fun when held at the edge of the galaxy. Plus, I figured if I'm going to die in a diplomatic incident, it might as well be somewhere with decent food." She rolled her eyes, the gesture almost human, and replied, "Well, at least you won't starve here. They've got space tacos that could probably fuel a starship or start an interspecies fight. Either way, entertainment's guaranteed." As they moved through the station's corridors, old habits resurfaced in the form of jokes and teasing, and armor against the awkwardness of reunion. He tried to mimic the way her people's warriors marched, which looked more like a clumsy dance, and she mocked his attempts at their language, throwing in ridiculous idioms that made even passing strangers chuckle. "You say that again, and I'm reporting you for cultural insensitivity," she warned, though her grin betrayed her amusement. Despite the levity, a current of something more serious ran beneath their banter, a quiet acknowledgement of the years lost and the battles fought in silence. When they finally sat in a dim corner of the station's cafe, sharing synthetic beverages that tasted vaguely like hope and disappointment, their conversation grew slower, heavier. "I always wondered if I'd see you again," she said softly. "Honestly, I thought you were just a ghost made up to keep me sane." "Well, I'm real," he replied, "though sometimes I think I'm the one who needs saving." Between confessions and laughter, they uncovered pieces of each other's lives, her struggles with the rigid hierarchy of her people, his doubts about the endless war he'd been sent to fight. Their dialogue was punctuated by the clatter of machinery and distant calls of merchants hawking exotic goods, a reminder that the universe didn't pause for old wounds. Yet despite the gulf of years and stars between them, a fragile bond began to form, spun from shared memories and a mutual, if reluctant, hope for something better. "You know," he said, standing up to leave, "if we're going to try and change the fate of our worlds, we might need better plans than just awkward reunions and bad jokes." She smiled, long ears twitching, and replied, "Agreed. But every revolution starts somewhere, even if it's with a space taco and a laugh." He wasn't sure what was more surprising, seeing her again after all those years, or realizing just how stubborn she still was. When she called him the guy who saved me during their first awkward encounter, it was as if decades of silence were suddenly punctured by a blaster shot, sharp, unexpected, and impossible to ignore. But as they moved from the busy terminals into the quieter, humming corridors of the station, it became clear this wasn't just a nostalgic reunion. It was the start of a tangled mission neither of them had planned for, with stakes higher than the thin oxygen levels in the station's recycling chambers. "So, you're really here," he said, rubbing his hands together as if warming them by an imaginary fire. "What's next? Do I get drafted into some intergalactic peace committee? Or am I stuck babysitting alien dignitaries?" She smiled, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and replied, "Oh, you'll be babysitting all right. Except the babies are all armed, extremely impatient, and possibly carrying plasma grenades." He laughed, the sound breaking the weight of history that seemed to hover between them. "Great. Just what I wanted." They moved through corridors lined with glowing panels and flickering holoscreens displaying news from war-torn planets and star systems on the brink of collapse. "Remember when all this tech was supposed to make life easier?" she mused, flicking a finger through the air to bring up a map of the sector. "Yeah, and instead it just made war faster and diplomacy harder," he replied, watching as the flashing red dots on the map marked active conflict zones. "Still, I guess someone has to try and patch up the mess. If we don't, who will?" Her long ears twitched as she studied the map, a habit he'd come to associate with deep thought, or brewing sarcasm. "Well, I was hoping it would be someone who doesn't talk so much and actually knows how to fly a starship. Hey, my piloting skills may be rusty, but I can still outmaneuver a death drone on a bad day." She raised an eyebrow. "Sure, if your definition of outmaneuver involves flying in reckless circles and hoping the drone gets confused." Despite the tension, their conversations drifted back to memories, to laughter, and to the strange comfort of shared history. She teased him about his outdated gear, which was less battle-ready and more collector's item, and he mocked her rigid military drills that looked like synchronized dancing to an untrained eye. "You really need to loosen up," he said as they navigated a narrow hallway. "Maybe take a vacation somewhere without laser fire and government secrets." She shook her head, smiling despite herself. "And miss out on all the fun?" "I don't think so. Besides, someone has to remind you humans that not all alien women are here to take over the universe." "Oh, I never thought you were," he joked, "but it's nice to know you're not planning to steal my spaceship either." They found themselves in a cramped briefing room, walls pulsing softly with holographic displays of treaties, battle plans, and diplomatic proposals. "Here's the problem," she said, gesturing to the chaotic data streams. "Our leaders don't want peace, they want power, and as long as that's true, no amount of talking will change a thing." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "So what do we do? Stand around pretending to be diplomats while the universe burns?" "No," she said, eyes narrowing. "We find the cracks, the small places where hope can sneak in. Like this." She tapped a flashing icon on the map. "A sector controlled by factions tired of war, but too proud to admit it." He nodded slowly. "So we play the long game. Slow, careful, and with a lot of bad jokes to keep us sane." She grinned, the kind of grin that meant trouble was coming. "Exactly. Besides, if we survive this, maybe we'll even write a book. How to save the galaxy without losing your mind." Their plan was far from perfect, riddled with unknowns and dangers lurking just beyond the station's airlocks. But in that moment, between sarcastic remarks and shared glances, something shifted. A fragile trust forming like ice on a distant moon, thin and easily broken, yet capable of holding weight if handled carefully. "You really think this can work?" he asked quietly. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I do know that sitting here waiting for someone else to fix it isn't an option." He smiled, the soldier's resolve rekindling alongside the old friend's hope. "Then let's get to work, and try not to die before the first meeting." "No promises," she said with a wink, long ears twitching in amusement. "But hey, if we do, at least we'll go out laughing." They stood on the observation deck of the station, watching a fleet of ships dance like fireflies against the endless black of space. The air was thick with anticipation, but neither of them spoke much. Years of war, of loss and silence had finally led to this fragile moment, one where the possibility of peace flickered like a candle in a storm. She glanced sideways at him, noting the lines etched deeper into his face, the way his hands still twitched with old habits. "You know," she said, voice teasing, "for someone who claims to be a soldier, you look surprisingly comfortable doing nothing." He smirked, shaking his head. "Says the alien warrior who looks ready to launch into a battle cry at any moment. Battle cries are overrated. I prefer awkward silences and bad jokes." He laughed. "Good, I'm full of those." The plan they had forged, a coalition of reluctant factions tired of endless conflict, was hanging by a thread. Negotiations had stretched longer than any of them hoped, and saboteurs lurked in every shadow. Yet despite the pressure, their unlikely alliance had begun to reshape old grudges into cautious cooperation. "Remember when we thought peace was just a fantasy?" she asked, watching the stars streak by as a transport docked nearby. "Yeah, and I thought my blaster was a fashion statement," he quipped, patting the worn weapon at his side. "Still is." Their shared humor was a balm, a shield against the cold reality that not everyone wanted the war to end. Their conversations had evolved beyond jokes and memories. She had come to see that diplomacy required more than stubborn resolve. It demanded vulnerability, the courage to admit fears and mistakes. He had learned that heroism wasn't just about saving a life in a moment of chaos, but standing up for hope when hope felt impossible. One evening, as they sifted through reports of ceasefires and skirmishes, she said quietly, "I never thought I'd find a friend in the enemy." "Funny how life works," he replied. "Enemies can be great friends, especially when they keep you on your toes." Then came the crisis, a last-ditch effort by hardliners determined to unravel the fragile peace. A surprise attack on a neutral colony threatened to ignite the war anew. The station plunged into chaos, alarms blaring and diplomats scrambling for safety. She and he moved quickly, their years of combat instinct kicking in. "After all this talk, you ready to actually fight?" she joked, drawing her blaster. "Born ready, though I'd rather be negotiating over drinks." "Too late for that," she grinned, ears twitching in excitement. Together, they coordinated defenses, rallied reluctant soldiers, and brokered a ceasefire even as explosions shook the station's hull. Amidst the turmoil, their bond proved stronger than any divide. When silence finally returned, they found themselves back on the observation deck, breathing heavily, adrenaline fading. "Not exactly the diplomatic dinner I hoped for," he said. She laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "No, but maybe it was what we needed, to remind everyone what's at stake." They looked out at the galaxy, a vast expanse filled with stars that seemed both indifferent and watchful. "Do you think this peace will last?" he asked. "I don't know," she admitted, "but I do know we've changed something. We've shown that even in the darkest times, trust can grow. And if it doesn't last, then we'll keep trying, together." In that moment, the years of separation, pain, and conflict felt less like wounds and more like the threads of a tapestry, messy, tangled, but ultimately beautiful. She reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear, her long ears twitching softly. "Thanks for saving me once," she said, "and thanks for sticking around." He smiled, a quiet, steady light in the vastness. "Maybe next time, you save me." They stood side by side, two unlikely allies bound by memory and hope, ready to face whatever the universe threw their way. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it felt possible. They had paused, looked back, and found the courage to move forward together.